Hey everyone, in this video we're going to continue our short culture and Latin lesson on the Bayeux Tapestry and look at part two. So if you didn't watch part one, I recommend you go back and kind of watch it so you can get an overview of everything we were talking about. But basically we're looking at the Bayeux Tapestry, which is preserving the famous Battle of Hastings and sort of the lead up to it. And it's called the Bayeux Tapestry because it was found in Bayeux Cathedral, right? And it depicts the different events of William the Conqueror, right? And sort of his lead up to the Norman invasion. And the reason we enjoy it is because it has Latin tituli, right? Latin titles on it. So what we're doing in this video is we're going through translating more of these tituli. And like I told you in the beginning of the first video, this is a great way if you're sort of a teacher to branch out and give a culture unit that has Latin built into it, which is always great. I use it in my classroom to show the connection of where Latin kind of really floods into the area of England, right? The British Isles. You have the Normans who are speaking French, which is really Latin, right? A dialect of Latin. It's mixing with the Anglo-Saxon Germanic that's already there, and it's setting up this idea of what's going to become English, right, in the next hundreds of years. You can see that all here. So the Norman invasion is one of those points that kind of creates English because you have this influx of Latin and French and all these different things coming together. Okay, so I like to use it for the culture of it, and also as a chance for my younger Latin students, right? Maybe only in their first or second year, to read some original Latin because the tituli are really straightforward. It's very direct grammar. They're not particularly difficult to read. And it gives them a chance to kind of read something original and feel good about it, right? Because it's not particularly hard and it ties into the culture unit. So that's what we're doing now. And I'd encourage you to do the same, right? Or however you want. And as we go, if you want to try this on your own, I would recommend kind of pausing after I say the Latin in the slides, see if you can translate it, and then listen to how I translate it. And as long as you're on the right track, you can feel pretty good. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. Okay, remember at this point, we just had William going through the area of sort of Brittany and that Breton-Norman War, basically conquering different areas of northern France. And this is all before the Norman invasion because King Edward the Confessor hasn't died yet. Okay, so here in this slide, you have Hic Wilhelmus dedit arma Haraldo. So you have here, William gave weapons to Harold. Right, you can see he's giving them there, right? He's giving them, or they're having a discussion here and saying that they're trading, and William is giving weapons to him. Here you have, this should be Hic, I would assume, but you have Hie, H-I-E, I guess you pronounce that, which is probably a typo of Hic. You can almost see if you look at the tituli that it was Hic and someone added the middle line to make it an E, which is a little odd, but I would assume this was supposed to be Hic, right? And you have Wilhelmus venit Bagias, okay? Now, this is an interesting one because you have here William came to, that name Bagias is Bayeux, right? Which is the Bayeux Cathedral. You can see it there and where the tapestry is from. So William shows up in Bayeux, okay? Then you have Ubi Herald Sacramentum Fecit Wilhelmo Duci, okay? And you have where, meaning in Bayeux. So where Harold made an oath, right? Fecit sacramentum, right? He made an oath, right? A sacrament. It's probably best translated oath to Duke William, Wilhelmo Duci, okay? So Harold makes this oath to Duke William, okay? Then you have Hic Harold Dux reversus est ad Anglicam terram. So here, Duke Harold, right? Harold Dukes, he reversus est, he returned, right? And this is our first time seeing a passive form, right, in the Latin. But he returned to English land, ad Anglicam terram, right, to English land. So you can see there, this part starts with the men kind of boarding the boat, and then they're depicted sailing across and landing back in England, okay? Then you have et venit ad Edwardum regum, and came to King Edward, right? Here's Edward the Confessor again, right? So he came to King Edward. Then you have hic portator corpus Edwardi regus ad ecclesiam, and you have an S dot, right? Or really an SCI, which is short for sancti, right? Sancti Petri Apostoli, right? So you have APLI. Again, these are all abbreviations or shorthand of different words in Latin, okay? But this is an interesting one because you have here the Corpus Edwardi, and again, notice how there's EA, a different spelling of his name. But the body of Edwardi Regus, of King Edward. So this is where Edward the Confessor has died, and it's going to start all the problems, okay? But the body of King Edward is carried, portator, to the ecclesiam, to the church of Saint Peter the Apostle. So Sancti Petri Apostoli is all genitive for literally Saint Peter the Apostle. Now, this is an interesting an interesting church, an interesting name. So I'd say it's worth pointing out because this is Westminster Abbey, right? The famous Westminster Abbey. Before it was called Westminster Abbey, this is St. Peter, the Church of St. Peter the Apostle. And it's interesting because at this time, Edward the Confessor had actually built up this church during his reign, right? And I did a little research into it. I hope I'm not wrong in this, but just a little digging. And it looks like the church was finished literally weeks before he died, right? So right before he died, they finally finished the church. But Edward the Confessor had been building it, and he's the first to be buried there, right? So he's buried underneath, the Church of St. Peter the Apostle, Westminster Abbey, and it sets that tradition, right, where it later becomes the coronation place of English monarchs, beginning with William the Conqueror, right? You're going to see when he takes over, he's going to go there and be crowned. So this is a really, really famous church and famous place being referenced in 1066, according to the tapestry. But there it is, right? And it's depicted there. You can see an image of it, and you can see the men carrying his body, right? There's his tomb with the crosses on it. It's just sort of an interesting bit of history being shown here. So I'd encourage you to look this slide up if you're interested. Then on the next one, you have Hic Eduardus Rex in lecto alloquitor fidelis. So here, right, King Edward in bed, right? So in lecto, he's lying down. He alloquitor fidelis. He speaks to his faithful, right? So he hasn't quite died yet, but it's showing him talking to his faithful crowd. And kind of telling them he's going to die is kind of the fideles, or his faithful is kind of the way to translate it. Sort of his faithful followers. Remember, he doesn't have an heir. Then you have et hic defunctus est, and here he died. Right, so there it is. So he finally dies, and you can see in the image, he's talking to the faithful on the top part of the image, and down beneath, you have a separate sort of part of the story where he died, right? And you can see he's dead there lying down, right? So hic defunctus est. Then you have hic dederant Haraldo coronam regis. So here they gave, right, dederant, they gave to Haraldo, they gave to him the coronam regis, the crown of the king. So this is Harold Godwinson, right? He's going to be the first to kind of take over the throne because he was there. But there are other claimants, so this is where the problems start. He takes over the crown, and people are basically going to dispute his claim, including William. Okay. Then you have hic residet Harold Rex Anglorum. So here sits, right? That residet is a version of sedere, right? In Latin, right? But here sits Harold, King of the English. And you can see he's been crowned. And there he is holding the sort of scepter, the crown, the different the royal images, right? The symbols of royal power here. He's holding them. So that's Harold Godwinson up on the throne. And he's been declared King of the English. Okay. Then you have Stigant, and here you have archiepiscopus is really what it is. So that word, it's shorthand. So you have, if you're looking at the picture, you can see archieps is what it looks like. That's short for archiepiscopus. It means archbishop, right? So you have Stigant is Stigand. It's a name, right? So you have Archbishop Stigand. Again, he might be famous. I apologize, I didn't look him up. But he's depicted there too. And if he's named, he's probably someone important. Usually in the Bayeux Tapestry, you don't put names over people unless there's someone of importance. Okay. Now, this slide is one of my favorites just because sort of an astronomy nerd here. You might not find it interesting, but I do. So I'm going to share it with you. But you have isti mirantor stellam. Right. And again, here's one of the few times we have sort of that passive form of a verb. You don't see too much in terms of passive on the tapestry. But here you have these people, isti, right? So the people depicted. What are they doing? They're mirantor, right? These people stare or marvel. And it's probably a better way to do it. And they're marveling at a stellam, a star. Okay, so you can actually see it on this part of the tapestry in the top right of this picture. There's something going there, but it's not really a star. It's something different. And here I'll change the slide so you can see it. This is Halley's Comet. So the star they're pointing at looks very weird. It's a ball with clearly some sort of flame or fire depicted, but it has a tail, and that's what makes it really weird. It's like, what do you mean they're staring at a star? The star has a tail. So this is really cool because what we know now is that accounts at the time, there's a few other accounts, they're describing this star as being very large and extremely bright. Okay. Now we know today by doing sort of some calculations and figuring out, basically counting backwards, we know that this was Halley's Comet, right? So it lines up with that. What is it? Something like every 86 years, Halley's Comet comes around. You can run that backwards and you can see that this is what they're looking at, right? So Halley's Comet has made a bunch of appearances over human history. And this is one, and it's cool because it gets documented. Okay. Now, the picture that you have to the right is Halley's Comet from, I think the last time it was here was in the 1980s. I want to say maybe 1986. That's what you're seeing depicted here. And again, you can see by this modern or more modern image of Halley's Comet that it kind of looks like what they depicted on the tapestry, right? So they're trying to draw you a picture of what they saw, which just makes it really interesting. Now, this is always kind of a fascinating thing because comets were very misunderstood in ancient times and even in medieval times. And it depends. Sometimes they're viewed like Julius Caesar. They're viewed as a good symbol. Like when Julius Caesar dies and the comet goes by, it might have been Halley's Comet now that I'm saying it. They viewed that as him going up and joining the gods. Another way to view it is that it's a sign of evil things coming. And it's actually where you get the word disaster from. So aster in Latin is a star. The dis part, I believe, is Greek, which means bad. So a disaster is literally a bad star, right? And it has to do with comets coming because they didn't know where they were from. And so a lot of times they kind of are portents of evil. So one way to interpret Halley's Comet is that maybe Harold Godwinson taking over the throne was not good, right? Or the death of Edward the Confessor was going to lead to problems. There's a couple different ways you can interpret this, but I encourage you to look it up. I'm sure there's another source from the time that shows how the people of basically England looking up and seeing this star would have felt. But again, just an interesting side note that this is Halley's Comet, and every time it comes by, we get really interesting depictions of it, including on the tapestry. Okay. Now you have here just Harold. It's his name, right? Nothing to translate there. It's just showing King Harold hanging out, sitting on his throne, talking to someone. Okay. But here you have hic navis Anglica venet in terram Wilhelmi ducis. So here, an English ship, right, a navis Anglica, right? So an English ship came to the lands of Duke William, right? So William is hanging out, right, in Normandy, and now you have the ship coming from England, basically to deliver a message. You can see the ship depicted here, okay? Then you have hic Wilhelmus dux usit naves aedificare. Okay, so you can see the Tituli is off on the left-hand side of this image. You can see Duke William sitting there talking. But the translation is here Duke William, right? Wilhelmus Dukes. He used it. So the J and the I are the same thing, right? So the consonantal I is a J in English, right? So you can see there it looks like juice it, but it would be use it in sort of classical pronunciation. Use it nawe. So he ordered someone. You can almost translate this. He ordered them to build ships, right? Edificare. And notice how they left the A off there, which is fine. It's just a different form of edificare, right? In sort of classical Latin, there'd be an A there, A-E. But you can see depicted, right? The people are going out, they're cutting down trees in the middle of the image, and they're clearly kind of shaping and building on the sort of right-hand side. And then all the way to the right, you get them building boats, right? So it's showing exactly what he did, or they're doing exactly what he ordered, right? So it's Duke William ordered them to build ships. So you can see that at this point, he's heard the news that Edward the Confessor has died, and that Harold Godwinson has taken over the throne, and now he's building his invasion force, right, to start the Norman invasion. Here you have hic trahunt naves ad mare. Right here, they drag trahunt, right? You can see them dragging. They drag the ships to the sea, ad mare. So you can see here that's exactly what they did. They build the boats on land, and now they're dragging them to the sea because they're going to sail across the English Channel. Okay. Then you have isti portant armas ad naves et hic trahunt carum cum vino et armis. Okay. So these men, isti, so these men carry, portant, they carry arms, right, armas, weapons, to the ships, right? You can see that's what they've got, a bunch of spears and different things. It almost looks like they've got swords in their hands if you zoom in, right? So they're bringing weapons to the ships. And here, right, so a little bit off to the right, if you want to look at it, here, they drag, trahunt, a carum, which is a cart. Think like a carriage, right? They drag a carriage or a cart, cum vino et armis, so with weapons and wine, right? Cum vino. So hey, if you're going to go invade England, you got to bring the wine. Why not? So you can see that they have that carriage with what looks like spears on it, and I'm guessing that those are wooden casks of wine, sure, right? But they're bringing up food and weapons because or wine, I guess, not necessarily food, but they're getting ready to go off and invade England. Okay. So we're going to pause it here again. I have one more video for you. In part 3, I'll finish off this, looking at the Bayeux Tapestry. But we've gotten to the point now where really in this section, part 2, you had the major events happening. So you had Edward the Confessor dying, right? The whole Westminster Abbey slide, which is cool, or scene, which is cool. You had Harold Godwinson taking over the throne. You had Halley's Comet, all these cool things. And now the Normans have prepared for war, right? And they're getting ready. William is getting ready to go off and invade England and take over the crown. Like I said in the previous video, if you want to keep learning, I'd highly encourage you to. There's a lot of great stuff you can look up, a lot of good YouTube videos. I just put one here, one that I happen to enjoy. But there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube. If you were to look at something like worldhistory.org, you can see there's great articles. There's a lot of good stuff. So keep learning. If you're interested in this stuff, keep at it. But otherwise, keep practicing the Latin if you're a Latin student, right? Keep reading it, trying it. Hopefully it made some sense. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you out. Good luck.